Oh, hi. It's me, the Lady Miss VaginaJenkins, and it is time for queer astrology. It's also time to celebrate my birthday! I am recording this video a little bit earlier than my birthday so that I can take my birthday week off in true Pisces sun fashion. So by the time you see this, I will have 47 años. I am a queer elder. I mean, I've been a queer elder, but I just enjoy getting older and I enjoy celebrating my birthday. You know, as a person who did not envision that I would live past the age of 25, as a person who had a number of what they call adverse childhood experiences, every year that I get to live feels like such a privilege. And so I really get into my birthday and celebrating all that I have survived. So yeah, I am celebrating my birthday. Drop a happy birthday in the comments, and I'll make a link in the description box below to my birthday wish list if you want to send me a birthday gift too. I totally won't say no. Because it is my birthday, I feel really reflective on my past experiences. So I wanted to do a bit of a story time and share some of my life experiences, but through an astrological lens. In particular, I wanted to talk about this aspect pattern that I have in my chart called a YOD, Y-O-D. And I wanted to talk about how my yod was activated with the start of my Saturn return. So let's look at this aspect pattern. I'll bring my chart up and let's talk about what had happened, because it was a lot. So this isn't my full chart, but rather just the part of my chart that I want to talk about today. This is an aspect pattern, which is basically a group of aspects creating a particular meaning in a person's chart. This is an aspect pattern that's called a yod, also known as the finger of God. And what it consists of is two quincunxes and an opposition. And let me show you what I'm talking about. A quincunx is a almost opposition, almost 180 degrees. It's technically 150 degrees aspect between two planetary placements. So mine is made up of this Pluto in Libra here, and my sun in Pisces. Those two planets are quincunx 150 degrees away from each other. It's also made up of my Saturn Moon conjunction, those two planets sitting next to each other, blending their energies. Saturn Moon conjunction in Leo, which is quincunx, again, my sun in Pisces. And then in the middle of it all, and this part is debatable. Some astrologers don't use the midheaven, which is what this MC is, as one of the aspects that contribute to a yod pattern, but I do, because I think it's really important to consider the angles in everything that you're doing. So yeah, the opposition is made up of my midheaven in Virgo here, opposite, again, my sun in Pisces. And you know, there's a lot that I could say about what this means to me as I interpret it, but I guess what I will ultimately say is all of these planetary placements at the top are pointing down to the sun in Pisces in the 4th house. I think that it points to a spiritual purpose centered on honoring my ancestors, and maybe breaking some generational curses. And that's all I'll say about that. So that's that aspect pattern. I just wanted to give us a brief overview of what all of these planets were and what it means. Now let's talk about the Saturn of it all. I'm considering this whole time frame because it's part of the story time. Now, the thing about me is I didn't note it in this particular chart that I made, but my natal Saturn, the Saturn placement that I was born in, Saturn in Leo, is retrograde. And from what I've noticed, retrograde planets in one's natal chart can speak to planetary lessons that we more easily internalize. What I mean by that as it relates to Saturn is that Saturn is a bit of a taskmaster. It has set forth this task, this idea that it wants you to accomplish over the span of your lifetime, and it wants you to put in a little bit of work every day towards accomplishing whatever this task is, right? With a Saturn moving direct in your natal chart, I have noticed that that can mean like external events that help you stay on task. But with a Saturn retrograde, which is my experience, it seems like I am internally driven to stay on task for the most part. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so when my Saturn return came along, I don't know that I experienced it as a huge jolt because of my natal Saturn being in retrograde. And because I was internally doing the work of staying on task, Saturn didn't necessarily have to remove things and distractions from my life in order to get me back on task, if that makes any sense. And I think that that is a very common Saturn return sort of experience, that when Saturn comes back to the exact place it was in that you were born, it's sort of a check-in point. Have you done what you were assigned to do? Oh, what is distracting you from doing what you were assigned to do? That kind of vibe, right? So yeah, yay for natal Saturn retrograde. Also, Saturn in Leo isn't necessarily the worst assignment that one could have. I think that my Saturn in Leo was the assignment of creative self-expression. And because this Saturn is connected to my sun in Pisces, I think that there is a lot to be said about the ways I am breaking generational or ancestral patterns of putting one's creativity, one's creative self-expression, one's joy, one's play on the back burner. And in this lifetime, or from most of my lifetime experience, I have been prioritizing that, and I feel like I am on task in that Saturn kind of way too. So yeah, when my Saturn return started in 2005, I had been performing burlesque for about 3 years by that time. And, you know, I started out with a burlesque troupe called the Dixie Pistols. We were a queer Southern burlesque troupe that worked primarily out of a bar in Decatur, Georgia. Decatur is a suburb of Atlanta. And it was a bar in Decatur called My Sister's Room. And it was the cutest lesbian bar there ever was. It still exists, but it exists in a very different incarnation now. And so, yeah, I had been performing for 3 years. I had an initial stage name that I ended up changing to The Lady Miss VaginaJenkins. And I'll link the video that explains why and how I chose my name. It has a lot of queer trans cultural significance. And so in that way, again, honoring my ancestors. Oh, by the way, ancestors are not just the folks that you are blood related to. Queer ancestors and queer transcestors are people that you have an energetic alignment with. In my estimation, that's my theory. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, I had been performing for a few years by the time that my Saturn return happened. When my Saturn return happened, my career took off. It was almost as if Saturn was rewarding me for engaging in some form of creative self-expression, and it kept feeding me opportunities to continue doing that. So between the years of like 2005, 2007, I started touring extensively. I definitely had a gig, at least one gig every weekend for that time between 2005, 2007, some big, some small. And I was earning the most that I've ever earned in my burlesque career during this time as well. And I was really, really enjoying myself, and I was enjoying being seen, you know, like very much like Saturn and Leo kind of vibes. This emphasis on wanting the spotlight, desiring the spotlight. And yeah, because my moon is right next to my Saturn, it felt like a coming home. The spotlight was a way that I felt nurtured and safe. And so many of the relationships that I made in this performance context felt, again, like coming home. I share this experience because, again, not all Saturn returns have to be this awful, torturous thing that you experience. It's all in your attitude towards what your assigned task is, if that makes sense. So that was the time period between 2005, 2007. And then Saturn moved into Virgo starting September of 2007. And it was in Virgo until July of 2010. As you can see here, my midheaven is in Virgo. And so midheaven in Virgo, midheaven generally speaking is the brightest part in one's chart. It's the equivalent of high noon, you know? It's the thing that people can see and receive about you. It's public reputation, your standing in the communities that you live in. And it can be associated with your work or career as well. But not everybody has a career that is necessarily tied to how they want to be perceived and received in their communities. And then in that case, I would look at the sign that the midheaven is in, not as a prescriptive for what sort of career you should engage in, but how you might engage in your public reputation, if that makes sense. And so for me, Saturn in Virgo was very much the public reputation of being known as an expert in this field, in burlesque, in queer burlesque particularly. I think that my public burlesque reputation was very much the reputation of someone who is well researched, you know, Virgo being ruled by Mercury kind of vibes. What are the details? What is the research? What can we do in terms of gathering data? It was during this time that I had the idea to write a book about queer burlesque history, and I definitely started gathering more research for that. And at the same time, with this midheaven being the brightest part of one's chart, I was seen as an expert in burlesque. Saturn crossing the midheaven can give the vibe of like culmination of one's career or a particular project in one's career or work or legacy. So this is definitely the time that I feel like my burlesque career hit its zenith. I was invited to do tours all over the US and Canada. I was able to travel to London for London Burlesque Festival. I was accepted for inclusion into the big Miss Exotic World Festival, which is like a 60-year-long event that has been going on in Las Vegas that celebrates the history of strippers, burlesque dancers, shake dancers, and is a really, really big deal in burlesque community. You know, it sounds a little bit like I'm bragging, but it was a beautiful time to be recognized for like the hard work that I had put into this like historical art form. I got to do a show with one of my favorite performers from the 60s. Her name was Toni Elling. And at the end of the performance, there was a talk back, like a panel discussion. And they asked Toni Elling, you know, what would you want to see this new neo-burlesque movement look more like? And she said specifically, I want to see more people doing what VaginaJenkins does. And that was such a highlight of my career for me, to be recognized for the way that I was holding this historical art form, you know? It was also during this time period, and again, this is another humble brag, but not so humble. I was really proud of the fact that if you Googled the phrase queer burlesque, I was the first thing that would come up in your Google search. It was also during this time that I was named the best burlesque dancer in Atlanta. So again, I'm bragging a little bit, but these are all like very much, you know, signs of the culmination of one's career, the culmination of years of hard work. And it was so confidence building, like being affirmed in all of these ways absolutely hit my Leo moon sort of self. And yeah, I felt so affirmed. I felt so confident in what I was doing, and I felt like I could do anything, you know? And it was during this time that I asked myself, how can I make a living from my burlesque career? Because at the time I was still working day jobs in food service and survival sex work, and I wanted to concentrate full time on my burlesque career and make a living out of doing that, you know? So I did the most courageous thing and maybe foolish thing that I have ever done. It seemed to me that one of the keys of success would be if I could have a smaller budget, then I would be able to have more creative freedom. And, you know, then as now, my rent and housing costs were eating up the majority of my income. And if I had had family, I am estranged from my family on both sides, my mother and father's side. But if I had had family, I would have moved back home, you know, and lived in my mom's basement and just had my creative career, you know. But I didn't have that. And so, but I did feel really confident in the way that my community was supporting me. And so I put a call out to my networks for anybody, anywhere in the continental US that would let me live in their place for free so that I could stack up money and just work a whole bunch of odd jobs, and hopefully at the end of a 6-month period have enough money to have an RV, mobile home, camper, but some sort of vehicle that would allow me to travel the US doing my burlesque work, because I was, again, getting so many offers from tours and different gigs all over the US, that I just thought if I could cut out housing and get on the road, that I might be able to make a living at this, you know? And in August of 2010, just as Saturn was moving into Libra, I received an answer from someone in my community that lived in Ohio, of all places. And they said that I could live in their basement for free for up to 6 months, and that I could, you know, just save my money so that I could achieve the dream, you know? And I didn't know this person at all. They were just literally someone from my social networks. She was a queer white woman that lived in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. And yeah, she said that her kid had just moved out, and so the basement was free. And so I sold all of my stuff and packed up the rest and my little dog Dolores, and I moved to Ohio. And it was quite literally the worst decision of my life. Ohio, if you know, you know. So yeah. So going back to the astrology of it all, it would have been Saturn transiting my Pluto in Libra. And so one of the things about Pluto is that it can help us transform. But it usually helps us transform by digging into the muck, unearthing secrets, digging deep, doing shadow work, looking at the gross, slimy undersides of the rocks. And yeah, really just like doing the hard work of excavating our lives so that we can transform. And then as far as transforming what? Well, my Pluto is in Libra and in the 11th house. The 11th house is about our social relationships, our fit in society. Because all of these houses build on each other, you know, like this is my public reputation in the 10th house. And then in the 11th house, you have the groups that you belong to as a result of your public reputation. So Pluto was trying to transform that. And then Libra, generally speaking, is also about relationships and our connections to people. So Pluto was trying to transform that, or rather Saturn transiting my natal Pluto was trying to get me to do the hard work of transforming those things. And yeah, that experience was very much unearthing some awful, disgusting things about people that I did not realize existed. And it definitely changed the ways that I connected to people. I feel like, you know, before then, again, because I'd been so affirmed for my creativity, I felt confident in the world. I felt like people really wanted to support me and see me succeed because that had been my story up until then, at least as it relates to my burlesque career. But the Saturn and Libra years sort of lifted the veil and I saw things very differently. So here's tea. This woman wanted me to move into her home, not because she was trying to help me, but because she had a crush on me and she wanted to add me to her polycule. Or it wasn't a polycule though, because it wasn't consensual. And that was the grossest part about the whole thing. So when I arrived, I realized that she had a partner that lived with her. So she was a white woman with like a really good job. So both race privilege and financial privilege. And she had a partner that lived with her that was a Black single mother of poverty class. And I got the vibe pretty early on upon moving there that she was engaging in financial abuse because this woman didn't have a job, and didn't have social support. She was beholden to this white woman for housing and food and all of her resources, and could not leave without endangering, you know, the stability of her child. And so there was that level of financial abuse that was happening. And they were poly, but this white woman was still cheating. So she was engaging with another relationship with another Black femme in her community, unbeknownst to her partner. And then she moved me up into the house with them. And I think she wanted to engage in another sort of secret relationship on the side. It was like she was a collector of Black femmes. So it was that dynamic. I don't know if you've ever experienced it. I've experienced it a lot because of my background in sex work, where a person is divulging a lot of really, really personal information to you because they're setting you up to be the black sheep. If you share any of this really personal, secretive information, then they will immediately label you the black sheep and you'll be the problem, and there'll be a sort of triangulation. That's why I'm making this shape. There'll be a sort of triangulation that happens. And so that is exactly what happened. She kept telling me about all of the people that she was cheating on her partner with, how she didn't really love her partner anymore and wasn't sexually attracted to her. And there were always these like little overtures, but I made it clear that I had no interest in sleeping with this woman, because my God, ugly inside and out. And so, yeah, the more that I made it clear that I did not want to engage with this woman in that manner, the more violent she got, and the more the triangulation began, and the more the bullying began. You know, oh, you didn't wash your dish in the sink, you didn't, and I have to slam cabinets about it. You know, like I don't, yeah, it's how I grew up, so I was very familiar with this kind of thing. And yeah, I was supposed to be there for 6 months, and I ended up being there for 3 months before I finally just gave up and quit. And I think that that's the idea, is that once again, it was supposed to be the idea of like this financial abuse. I wouldn't have had enough money to escape her, and so she probably felt like she could do whatever she wanted. It was a mess. And I have to say, it permanently changed my relationship to people. I think I lost a lot of trust in humanity watching this woman operate, not only in her house, but with her romantic partners and in the community, because she was very highly revered in the community. And so, yeah, about 3 months in, I ended up packing up all my stuff again and moving to the West Coast. Landed in Los Angeles because that's where my boo lived. And yeah, that situation was weird. I mean, we all know the common complaints about Los Angeles being like a little fake, a lack of intimacy. Everybody's like trying to get their come up. And so there isn't a whole lot of community. And it was very much that feeling as well. And so, yeah, the trauma of dealing with that white woman in Ohio, and then subsequently realizing the lack of community in Los Angeles, it just kind of broke me. And then this combined with the fact that, like, again, the Saturn and Virgo years were the culmination of my career. And culmination means that this is the best it's gonna get, and I swear it just kind of fizzled out and went downhill from there. I mean, I continued performing through 2020, so like for another 10 years, but it definitely shifted from the idea of making this my full-time career to more of a hobby. And that's fine, people need hobbies. But yeah, I was and still am quite surprised at the way things fizzled out. So yeah, it wasn't until Saturn swung back around into Aquarius in 2020 that I renewed my commitment to creative self-expression as the bulk of my existence. It wasn't until Saturn swung all the way back around to Saturn in Aquarius, and I experienced a Saturn opposition. So Saturn in Aquarius would have been happening in my third house, and that would have been directly opposite of my natal Saturn in Leo. And so, yeah, that Saturn opposition brought these things back up again. It was like another check-in point. And I decided that I did want to renew my commitment to living as a full-time artist of some sort, though burlesque did not feel like it was an option anymore given COVID safety protocols, or rather the lack of COVID safety protocols, and just, the lack of community and ableism that I experience here in the West Coast as it relates to burlesque community. And so, yeah, when that check-in happened in 2020 and I had that Saturn opposition, I became really, really clear about self-expression again as a way to heal generational trauma, experiences of ancestors not having the privilege and the space to prioritize their creativity. Yeah. Is there a moral to this story? Let me think of one. Maybe it's the moral of there being really no bad decisions. You ultimately end up doing what it is that you are supposed to do in terms of like your divine purpose, your Saturnian task. It just might unfold in a different way than you expected. I'll say that. Because now, as we are now in 2024, I'm experiencing such a creative renaissance, but without any recognition for it. And there was a time in my life in the Saturn and Leo years where I thought that that was my driving force, being recognized, being seen. And now I understand that that is not necessarily a priority. It's nice, but that I recognize myself, that I center creativity and joy and pleasure in my life for my ancestors who could not and did not have the space to do so. So yeah, that is the story of both my Saturn return and the ways Saturn activated all of the placements in my yod to help me attain or move into my spiritual purpose. So yeah, happy birthday to me as I sit here in 2024 experiencing this creative renaissance and feeling joy more days than not, and communing with my ancestors and knowing that I am guided and protected by them. And my creative self-expression is not just for me, but is also healing them. Yeah. So happy birthday to me. That's it. That's the video. Thank you so much for being a part of my new vision of what community can look like for me. Thank you so much for engaging with my content, being subscribed. And yeah, thank you for witnessing all of the ways that I am changing, learning, growing, healing, and being part of my community. And as always, thank you for making time for queer astrology. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday.